BC. August sun scorched the forum's marble till it sizzled. Old Lucius hunched over his olive baskets, fingers wrinkled like dried figs. A roar erupted across the square. A young noble in purple-trimmed toga waved from the speaker's platform. Gold rings blinding in the light. Citizens, his voice blared like a war horn. Our legions crushed Mithridate's rebels. Olives sizzled in Lucius clay pots 3 days ago. Right here, a slave in gray rags had charged the platform, clutching a broken tile. The noble's laughter hadn't died before spear guards tackled him. Lucius saw it. The captain's bronze sword punched through the slave's neck. Blood hit the platform carvings, staining victory's gilt wings rust red. The square boiled like stew. Left, spice stalls reeking of myrrh and sweat. Right, a scribe squatting over clay tablets, drafting complaints for plaster-caked laborers' fingernails, packed white from plastering Jupiter's temple. Lucius' eye caught 2 slaves in iron collars being herded past, chains scraping stone. One stumbled. The overseer's lash split his bare back. Blood droplets sprayed a wine barrel. The vintner cursed, scrubbing with a rag, but keeping the bloody barrel waste not. Afternoon bled into Circus Maximus fever. Lucius counted coins when a thud sounded behind him. A woman in linen dress lay collapsed. Her bread sack spilled moldy black loaves across the stones. Some riffled her purse. Others called her a faker. Lucius knew her Tiber slum widow. Yesterday seen digging through rotten cabbage in the trash. Starved, grape seller Apuleius muttered. Grain ships late last month. Warehouses full of weevils. Rich folks still get white bread. Our loaves. He squeezed his own ration roll, hard as rock. Pebbles baked right into the dough. As circus cheers drifted over, Lucius packed up. He remembered last month's chariot race. Reds vs. Blues rounding the turn. The stands exploded. Men threw gold chains. Others smashed wine jugs. That gray horse, the one that went lame near the finish, the driver slit its throat right on the track for slowing the team. Nobles clapped. A silk-draped lady even tossed her pearl earring down, giggling like a schoolgirl. Reward for a clean kill. As the sun dipped low, old Lucius passed the public latrine at the corner of the forum. The place always reeked of piss stink, but today there was the coppery tang of blood. He peered in. A body lay curled against the wall, a young guy in slave's rags. Throat slit ear to ear. 2 night watch soldiers stood nearby chatting. One poked the corpse with his spear. Another runaway from the gladiator school. The other spat. Run. Brands still fresh on his neck. Stole his master's wine. More like, beside the body lay a broken pottery shard. Scratched into it was the word freedom, blurred now in a puddle of blood. Lucius quickened his pace home. He lived in the Subura tenements, stacked like a house of cards. Taverns below, people crammed above. Maybe rotting fishing nets drying up top. His attic room held just a straw pallet. Cockroaches spilling from the wall cracks near the alley shrine. He saw kids fighting over a moldy cheese wedge. The littlest got shoved face first into the mud, his wails drowned under the clinking mugs from the tavern. That night, lying on his pallet, Lucius heard the distant roar of the circus, emptying. He thought of the fainting widow, the body in the latrine. The blood spray on the speaker's platform. Folks called this Rome's golden age. Marble temples scraping higher, triumphal arches carved finer, but underneath the shine, it felt like something rotten was festering. He remembered a rumor from 3 days back. Some eastern trader said slaves now outnumbered citizens in Rome, so many the Tiber couldn't wash all that blood clean. Lucius turned over, straw crackling. He didn't know it, but right then, 3 miles off at the gladiator school, a dozen chained men were being whipped through spear drills. Wooden dummies, painted with faces. The trainer barked, "Throat strike, don't give him a chance to cry for mama." Moonlight through the barred windows glinted on their sweat and blood. And up north at the granaries, officials shoveled sand into the new wheat. They counted the extra gold coins, laughing like screech owls. That was Rome's golden age. Frankincense drifting over the forum, rose petals scattered in the circus, temple domes glowing like gilded fire at sunset, but crammed in the cracks of all that glitter, countless knife edges, chains, and hollow bellies. Lucius' last thought before sleep. If I drop in the street tomorrow, will they kick me to the gutter like that widow? Or worse, brand me a runaway slave and dump me straight into the arena? He didn't know how soon that thought would come true. Rome's dawn still clung to mist when the tunnels under the Circus Maximus started baking. 300 gladiators packed the dripping stone cells. The clank of chains mixed with ragged breathing, like molten lead bubbling. Some sharpened dagger edges, others rubbed olive oil on fresh scabs. A Thracian bound his ribs with herb-soaked rags, a wound from last night's trident strike. Bone deep, he knew if he skipped the games today, tomorrow he'd be thrown to the lions. This wasn't random slaughter, it was choreographed death. Romans called it entertainment. But every piece clicked like gears meshing. First, matchmaking. Referees paired fighters by type, record, even crowd favorites. A Rashirius net fighter, quick but unarmored. Never fought a Murmillo fish helmet gladiator with his heavy shield and neck guard. The mismatch guaranteed drama. For star vs. star matchups, posters went up in the forum. 3 days early, whole city placed bets for executing slaves or prisoners. Just toss them to the beasts. Not even a wooden sword handed out. Regular folks couldn't even get on the fight card. Think just standing on the sand meant you were in. Wrong. Gladiator school tryouts were tougher than legion recruiting. Pompey's school records from 58 BC listed. Asterisk applicant must single arm lift a 20 kg bronze shield for 15 minutes straight. Land 20 dagger strikes per minute on a moving target. Take 30 oxhide whiplashes without passing out. Asterisk, these tests would break modern gym rats who can deadlift 100 kg. Why? Their shields were solid bronze spiked edges, 3 times heavier than gym props. Their dagger blades had volcanic grit baked in sliced skin like wet paper. That reaction speed test, dodging barbed javelins, even if you somehow got in, the training would break you from dawn till noon. Shield wall drills in sandpits, 10 men shoving against each other's shields until shoulders popped, mimicking battle charges. Afternoons, Live target practice with blunt weapons, scabs ripped open daily. Every gladiator's back looked like plowed dirt. Evenings, hauling sand-filled goatskins around the circus track, 3 laps for endurance. Arena fights averaged 20 minutes, but barn burners could hit an hour. That cardio test, swinging a sword, blind from sweat, in 100 degrees F heat. The pain tolerance gap was deadly. Gladiators were trained from day one to ignore wounds. Masters would cut their arms, then make them hold up shields till blood turned the shield rust red, trident through the thigh, cauterize it with a searing hot poker, wrap it in wine-soaked rags, and keep fighting. Modern folks need a band-aid for a paper cut. In the arena, a gut slice in round 1 meant bleeding out on the sand. A gladiator, he'd be scheming how to use that wound to lure you in. Referees held another noose, perched below the senator's box, with brass bells and red flags. If a fighter held back instead of finishing, bell ring, pick up the pace, playing dead. An assistant jabbed your foot with a white-hot poker flinch, and you're dead. Worst was the crowd vote. When a gladiator begged for mercy, the ref looked to the stands. If the noble section gave thumbs down, historians debate the exact gesture, but the intent was death. It was over. If the cheap seats booed loud enough, even nobles wanting mercy had to change the call. Modern folks wouldn't know the code. Kneeling there yelling, "I yield," just to see a forest of thumbs stabbing down. Fine, I'll just practice swordsmanship myself. Nope, gladiator gear was leagues beyond modern replicas. A Murmillo's helmet had nose guard and cheek flaps, vision slit narrower than a mail slot. Weighing twice a motorcycle helmet, a Thracian's curved sword was precision engineered, hit a shield, and it'd slide right down into your wrist. That took 20 years of muscle memory. Modern tourists in Rome forget wielding the stuff, just strapping on a Murmillo's greaves. Leg guards would make your calves swell from the metal pressure. You'd twist an ankle in 2 steps. So when you're standing at that arena tunnel gate, hearing the crowd roar like thunder, fingers brushing rust off the door latch, you've already lost. You're not fighting some gladiator. You're up against a death machine. Rome spent 200 years perfecting from the matchmaking to the weapons, the training to the crowd's bloodlust. Every gear grinds together. And modern folks, we're not even grease in the machine. We're just a raw hunk of meat, jammed into the grinder. You hit a crossroads in downtown Rome, finally breathing easy by a bronze Neptune fountain gushing in the square. Thank God, that panic when the patrol almost grabbed you after you arrived. Over. At least you're not arena bait yet. But what you don't know, invisible killers are already worming their way into your life through your pores, down your throat, stuck to your sandals. 2 blocks down, the public baths beckon Rome's favorite hangout. You kick off your sandals, bare feet slapping polished marble. Hot, perfume-thick air wraps around you. The bath owner tops off a copper water jug. You miss the pipes, snaking along the wall's dull gray lead. Rome built its whole water system with this soft, moldable metal, loving its shiny, noble look. They didn't know lead ions were leaching into every sip. You gulp down 2 cups, leads already gnawing your nerves. First, temples pounding. Soon, fingers twitching out of control. Later, memory fading like moth-eaten parchment. Finally, legs giving out. Rich Romans called it gout. Really, just slow lead poisoning. The real nightmares, the changing room. A server hands you a rough linen towel, still flaking with the last guy's skin. Mediterranean sun can't kill what's woven into the fibers. Scabies mites, tiny see-through bugs, needlepoint size. Right now, they're crawling into your armpits, your groin. 3 days later, angry red rashes, an itch that'll keep you up all night. Scratch till yellow ooze bleeds under your nails. Bather's itch. That crap creeps through every bathhouse in Rome. Worse, gonorrhea. Hookers working the steam room corners. Their junk carries bacteria that'll crawl up your pipe. Pissing will feel like passing shards of glass. Bad cases rot you raw. Stumbling out starving. You hit a food stall by the square. Wine fumes drift from clay jugs. The vendor sloshes you a cup. All smiles you miss the white powder he stirred in. Sugar of lead, made from vinegar and lead chunks. Romans thought sweet wine was classy. Didn't know it spiked lead levels tenfold. You down 2 gulps. Tastes richer than modern Cabernet. Right, what you can't taste. A lead ion storm brewing in your gut. 6 months max. Teeth loosening one by one. Black lines blooming on your gums. End stage lead poisoning. Check the roast lamb on your plate. Crispy outside. Green tendons underneath. Rome has no refrigeration. Meat stalls sell stuff sitting out for days. Vendors rub it hard with juniper berries and bay leaves to hide the rot. You take a bite. Spoiled protein ferments in your belly. Salmonella and botulism kick off a rave. Tomorrow, sky-high fever, puking and shitting yourself dry. Get a quack doctor, forcing myrrh vomit juice down your throat. That's just pouring gas on the fire. Pliny the Elder wrote it in Natural History. Food poison lands in Rome's top 3 killers for the poor. Nighttime's the real killer. You're trudging back to your rented room on the cobblestones. When thud, something heavy drops around the corner. 2 slaves are dragging an unconscious pleb with chains. Guy bumped their master's stall. They're hauling him to the black market. No ID tag. Who's to say he isn't a runaway? You slow your step. But the gang at the alley mouth spots you. They're shaking down shops for protection money. Fresh meets easy pickings. You try to bolt, but the gutter's slick with rotting veggies and animal guts. Can't get traction. Someone chucks a wine jug. Pottery shards slice your forehead. Blood blinds you. That's when it hits. In Rome, the arena's death is scripted, but the knives in the street, the parasites in the baths, the lead in the wine, those everyday killers, they're the real ghosts you never see coming. Think dodging the arena makes you lucky. Wrong. City death rolls show a regular pleb had a 1 in 8 chance of dying violently every year, cut down by slave revolts, poisoned by bad meat, or rotted by bathhouse plagues. Arena death rates. Pro gladiators faced 15% odds per fight. That's their job hazard. But you, some modern dude who's never held a sword, you'll croak from lead pipes in the baths. A rotten market. Meet long before fight night. You stand on Rome's cobblestones, pebbles biting your soles. 5 minutes ago, you were grabbing a Slurpee at a 7-Eleven. Now, bam, dumped into 1st century BC noon sun. Cicadas screech. Roasted chickpea smoke drifts from a stall. Before you can blink, A hand clamps your neck like a vise. Two dudes in belted tunics yank your collar. One shouts, "Look at this soft skin. Must be some rich man's new runaway." You struggle. Their grip's iron. Worse, you stammer, "I'm not a slave." The crowd laughs. Their words sound like gibberish rolling rocks. You only catch stranger and mancipium Latin for property. In ancient Rome, status wasn't on an ID card. It was branded on your bones. Top-tier citizens wore invisible crowns they voted in the forum. Slick-talked their way out of trouble. Even dodged floggings because citizen, freedmen, they hid their ex-slave past in paperwork, couldn't be senators, couldn't wear purple-trimmed togas, couldn't even marry their daughters to citizens without the Senate breathing down their necks. Slaves, legally not people, talking tools, crouched in the slaver's wooden cage. You watch the Gaul in the next stall get branded on the shoulder with a red-hot iron, the letter L, his new owner Lucius Mark. Same way they brand cattle. Language is a sharper wall. You took 2 years of college Latin, but textbook, salve, hello, and valete. Goodbye means squat here. The bread seller hag screeches, nummy. Coins. You pull out your phone to scan. She whacks you with a copper bowl, screaming, "Fur." Thief. A city guard jabs an ivory staff, barking curious. Whose? You stammer, muse. Mine. He thinks you mean, "I belong to someone," hands you straight to the first fat merchant, who claims, "That's my lost slave." The deadliest thing, no paper trail, Roman ID, was shockingly crude. Citizens carried bronze citizen tags engraved with clan name and hometown. Freedmen stitched their libertas, freedom papers, inside their toga flimsy papyrus that bled in rain. Slaves had markers, owner collars, notched ears, or the worst branded faces. You pat your pockets, just crumpled metro tickets and maxed out credit cards. To Romans, worthless trash. One day you try slipping away with a merchant caravan to Ostjaport, hoping to stow away on a ship back to Greece. Dock taxmen stop the traders, checking papers. Citizens show testamentum, birth proof via will. Freedmen need cessio transfer papers. Slaves get checked for mancipium. Sale contract. Your turn comes. The taxman twists your wrist, feeling for calluses. No farmhand's hands, no gladiators. He squints. No papers, stranger. Pay 30 denarii. $50 fine. Or work it off in the arena. You pull out your last coins, euros. He holds one up to the light, then bellows. Counterfeit. A wave of his hand. 2 spear-toting soldiers shove you toward the Colosseum. That's when it hits you. In Rome, avoiding the arena is harder than winning in it. No papers. You're a suspicious character in the market. Ownerless property on the streets. Walking target to the patrols. The old olive seller screams, "Thief," if you glance too long at her stall. Tavern workers pin you to a wine barrel and force drink you for not eating bread properly with fingers. Kids chuck rocks, knowing no one cares if unowned property gets roughed up. You once hid in a bathhouse steam room, waiting for heat to die down, but a bath scrubber saw your back smooth. No whip scars, real slaves were shredded. He ratted you out. The bath owner felt your arm muscle. This build, sell for good coin in the beast pits. You bolted, smashing a pottery stall in the alley. Shards slicing your ankle. Chasers multiplied. Kill the spy. 5 denarii for his hands. You tumbled into a reeking gutter. Sewage stench in your nose. Remembering chapter 3. Dying before fight day is normal in Rome, but now you grasp something worse. You can't even avoid getting thrown into the game. Dusk finds you tied to a post in the arena's backstage. A Thracian gladiator in the next cage grins. Blood still crusted on his arm guards. Crowd noise swells. The announcer's Latin booms. Tonight's main event, Masterless Stranger vs. The Net Fighter. You shake your head wildly. No one cares. Torchlight stretches your shadow, long and thin across the sand, like a reed about to snap. That's when you know. In the grinding gears of Roman society, with no papers, no voice, no proof you were never a person, you're just a mistake, and mistakes get cleaned up. Midnight Rome. Damp fog curls over the gladiator graveyard. At the Aventine Hill's foot, moonlight spills across a bleached marble slab, the inscriptions worn almost smooth. Marcus Labeo, gladiator, aged 28, just a common 1st century tombstone, but it holds survival codes that'd freeze modern blood. Archaeologists have dug up over 300 gladiator cemeteries around Rome. The stats hit like a sledgehammer. These sand fighters lived only 25 to 30 years on average. Compare that. Roman pleb men hit 40. Slaves worked to death. Barely made 35, but the human weapons shorter lived than the lowest slave by 5 to 10 years. Their bones are maps of pain. Shin bones, tibia, knotted with old breaks, collarbones scarred by trident strikes, skull fragments from wooden shields still embedded inside the bone. Not accidents, the daily grind training and fighting, written in blunt force trauma, but the real gut punch, the kill rate under Pompeii's arena seats. Archaeologists found 17 chained iron boxes inside. Wooden plaques recording the last 5 fights before Vesuvius blew in AD 79. Average per game, 12 pairs of fighters, at least 1.8 bodies left on the sand. That's a 15% death rate per fight. And that's professionals, guys trained since age 12, 5 hours, sword drills daily. 3 hours running with weights, soaked wounds in animal blood to build pain tolerance, knew how to stop bleeding with olive oil and ash. A modern gym rat wouldn't even grip a Roman dagger right. Forget dodging a netcaster's rope or blocking a heavy sword with a curved shield. Here's the kicker. Dying in the arena was the lucky death. Zoom out to the whole rotten city. Pliny, the Elder's natural history, drops a nightmare stat. In AD 60 Rome, plebs had an 8.7% annual violent death rate, meaning 1 in 12 people got wiped out yearly. How? Lead-poisoned bathwater, rotting your guts, run over by a chariot in the forum, beaten to death by city guards for wearing the wrong color stripe on your toga. Most common, getting snatched by slavers. No citizen badge. Mess up your Latin. Your cargo, straight onto a slave cart. Arena, fodder, gladiator material. String these numbers together. A modern dude's survival odds look Swiss cheese. Say you miraculously dodge lead pipes, slavers, and street knives make it to fight night. What then? Pro gladiators won 65% of fights, but that's after 4 to 5 bouts a year. Hundreds of combat hours. A grabbed fodder gladiator. First fight death rate 78%. That number's scratched into the Colosseum's dungeon walls. No-name losers counting their end with fingernails on limestone. Behind these stats, Rome's cold-blooded math. The arena's gore was political glue, so they manufactured sacrifices. Gladiator school ledgers show training a pro cost 3x a slave's price. Why bother? Crowds craved fresh meat dying and keeping plebs hungry, sick, and scared. Best way to make them sit in those seats and point thumbs down. Fear was the real ticket seller. Moonlight hits Marcus's grave. Distant arena, cheers drift on the wind. We romanticize the glory. 2,000 years later, miss the point. For most shoved onto that sand, gladiator honor was just the last spark flying when the machine crushed a life, and us modern softies, trapped in this data web of death, we wouldn't last one fight. Hell, we wouldn't even make a decent spark. In the long gallery of world history, there's a painting that makes you stop and stare. Sacred watchtowers gently unveiling themselves in the pale light of dawn. The ancient Nile murmuring quietly, and a civilization lovingly dubbed the cat people, revealing its unique mark, the domestication of cats. If you close your eyes, can you imagine how cats became the beloved companions and guardians of ancient Egyptians? Unraveling this mysterious chapter of history takes more than faded murals and fragments of writing. It calls for diving into the river of time and uncovering the shared needs and destinies that brought humans and cats together. In the earliest days of ancient Egypt, life revolved around the Nile. People farmed the land, tending golden fields of crops and watching hope grow right before their eyes. But lurking behind those abundant crops was a ruthless enemy, mice. Swarms of mice would ruin harvests, relentlessly feeding off the sweat and hard work of the people. The ever-resourceful Egyptians finally found a powerful ally, the cat. The story of cat domestication is inseparable from the demands of an agricultural society. Cats were agile and natural hunters, just what was needed to keep pests in check. Little by little, these wild hunters stepped out of the arms of nature and became a shared treasure of human society. And that's just the beginning. Over time, cats came to be seen as protectors, not just in the fields, but in every corner of daily life, making their presence felt far and wide. Let's step onto the banks of the Nile and set out on a journey into the world where cats and humans danced together. We'll uncover the story of how cats were domesticated, explore the ancient Egyptians' sacred love for them, and approach these mysterious and elegant creatures with wonder and respect. As we follow in their silent paw prints, we'll travel across millennia, unlocking the secrets of the civilization proudly called cat people. Between ancient canyons and blooming oases, let the stories of cats flow with the river, unfolding little by little. And then there's Bastet, cherished cat-headed goddess whose legend is steeped in the fragrance of ancient Egypt, bathed in the gentle sunlight along the Nile. Egyptians revered Bastet as the protector of the home, of fertility, and even of war. Her story is etched with her gem-like gaze that pierces the mist of time. Through towering pyramids and bustling temples, Bastet's image, carved in hieroglyphs, painted on walls, sculpted in grand temples, remains to this day. Even wandering through ruins, visitors can still catch glimpses of those graceful feline silhouettes. Why did these easygoing creatures become the icons of a 3,000-year-old empire? Step into the dim corridors of a temple. Giant stones block the sun, and only a trickle of light sneaks through the cracks. As you dig deeper into Bastet's myths and sacred roles, the answer becomes clear. Cats, with their nimble paws, kept fields safe from rodent threats. Their effortless hunting seemed like a blessing sent from above. Witnessing this, people slowly came to believe cats had divine powers of protection. This belief went beyond ecology, linking Bastet and her feline kin to deeper spiritual meaning. Her eyes seemed to turn into stars, guarding people from fear and darkness. She became part of a uniquely Egyptian value system, a detailed and intimate form of faith. Just as architects raised pyramids for the pharaohs and scholars carved wisdom into stone, cats, true to their nature, offered silent nourishment for the human spirit. In Egyptian culture, cats wore many hats. Bastet was not just the goddess of hunting, but also of the moon and of music, alluring and mysterious. When night falls, her protective glow seems to rise from her statues, giving worshippers a glimpse of paradise. Old texts even say Bastet once sewed up the shattered sky to restore cosmic order, a flash of mythic starlight found in Egyptian hieroglyphs. Let's keep wandering along those ancient banks and see where the cats take us, as their stories ripple outward across history. In the everyday lives of ancient Egyptians, cats were way more than just pets or guardians. People believed these animals were sacred, full of spiritual energy, and able to connect humans and the gods. Every household would honor Bastet, the cat goddess, hoping for health and happiness, and even the pharaohs would pray to her for good luck, especially whenever something big was happening, like building a pyramid or making an important decision. Over time, as archaeologists uncovered more and more cat mummies and other ancient relics, we've started to piece together just how deep the bond between Egyptians and their cats really was. Picture this. Close your eyes for a second and imagine yourself at an Egyptian festival. Bright moon overhead, bonfires crackling, storytellers spinning tales of freedom and strength, and Bastet's quiet statue standing watch in the temple. In that moment, it almost feels like you can reach across the years and touch a civilization that poured heart and soul and a sense of awe into its incredible legends. The gaze of Bastet, always calm and powerful, guides us into the origins of those mysterious myths. It's this faith, so deeply rooted, that lets us see the incredible religious power behind Egypt's stone temples and monuments. The more we explore, the more we're captivated by the never-ending song that was the Egyptians' love for their cats. Just imagine. It's sunset along the Nile, the light painting the dunes gold. Behind a low fence, a strong, graceful cat stretches out on a bed of golden straw, half asleep, purring away. For these cats, life was good, almost like they were just another member of the royal family, being served and respected to the fullest. In this chapter, let's peel back the mystery and see what lies behind the non-material cultural legacy of the Egyptian house cat. From the rich rituals and carefully prepared meals to the dignified burials, digging into why these animals were so cherished, the way ancient Egyptian families cared for and respected their cats was truly something special. Back then, life was tough, so families saw cats as symbols of good fortune. Thanks to their skill at guarding grain stores and hunting down pesky mice, many households set up lavish, beautifully decorated shrines to honor their cats, who were seen as powerful, mystical beings and deserved the highest respect. In a way, the house cat held a status almost equal to people, carving out their own unique place in the heart of the family. Not only that, but ancient Egyptian families went all out when it came to preparing special offerings for their cats before placing them at the family shrine. They were obsessed with quality. Food for the cats had to be top-notch, prepared with extra care and attention. Their cats dined like royalty. We're talking fish, meat, grains, and even homemade cat treats, packed with all the nutrients you can imagine. Honestly, these furry friends got meals better than most humans. To Egyptians, honoring the cat goddess meant respecting the higher powers that gave cats their gifts. Pampering their house cats was seen as a way to connect directly with the divine. What's even more touching is how much respect Egyptians showed when a cat passed away. It wasn't just the end. They acted like their pets were just taking a long nap. That's why the Egyptians developed their own kind of animal funeral rituals. Beloved cats would get their own burial ceremonies, sometimes laid to rest in special stone or wooden coffins, wrapped in linen, sometimes even sent off with jewelry by their side, showing how important they were. All these beautiful funeral offerings spoke volumes, not just about grief, but about the family's love and the social status of cats in that world. Now, let's step out of this gateway to the past and look at what truly mattered to people back then. Not kings or generals, but the family companion curling up at someone's feet. What seems normal to us today was once a powerful symbol of civilization back in the days when Egyptians sailed the sun boat under the stars and wrestled with the wild world around them. Fast forward to today, as we scroll through endless cat photos on our screens, it's wild to imagine how totally different life was thousands of years ago along the Nile. Back then, Egyptians showed the purest respect for these animals who shared their world, whether it was spoiling them in life or honoring them in death. Cats weren't just pets, they were a bridge between human will and the sacred. If you listen closely, it's almost as if the whispers of ancient Egypt still drift through our routines, reminding us of a time when cats really were seen as heavenly messengers. And it wasn't just a family thing. In the grand cities along the Nile, the law took cats very seriously. Legal documents, as official as a sunbeam from Ra, spelled out just how much cats were valued. From Pharaoh's commands to regional policies, Egyptian law carefully outlined and protected cats' rights across 3,000 years of Egyptian history. Cats were more than family guardians. They were woven right into the fabric of society. Art and sculpture show how pharaohs protected cats, and old papyrus scrolls straight up recorded their high status. Hurting a cat wasn't just bad manners. It was a serious crime that threatened the harmony of both society and nature itself. In folk tales and religious stories, cats were seen as having almost magical energy and a kind of divine quality. People believed that if cats disappeared, bad luck would fall on the whole community. Hurting a cat wasn't just cruel, it was like messing with the balance of the universe. That's why the laws were so strict. Ancient records actually spell out some pretty harsh punishments. If you killed a cat, you could be sentenced to death, forced to pay a huge sum, or even required to provide a living cat as compensation. Some scholars say these rules reflected the Egyptians' unique way of connecting nature and religion. In their world, everything was intertwined. Cats weren't just loved, they symbolized living in harmony with the world. The laws protecting cats were about respecting life itself and keeping the sacred bond between people and the gods alive. But these old documents also highlight something intriguing. Not all cats were treated the same. For example, cats owned by noble families clearly had higher status than ordinary cats. So, even in a society famous for adoring cats, a pet's privileges depended a lot on its owner's place in the social pecking order. To us today, that kind of hierarchy feels both familiar and a bit ironic. For the ancient Egyptians, building this kind of legal system was probably their way of keeping the peace and making sure society ran smoothly. The pharaoh's laws showed not only how advanced their civilization was, but also just how much they respected sacred life. Their strict justice, mixed with deep love for cats, sends a message across the ages. The right to life is also a spiritual right, and humans have a responsibility to care for both the divine and the living world, just like today's laws shape our relationship with nature. These ancient texts show how seriously people in the past took the pursuit of fairness and justice. Tied up with all this respect was a rock-solid belief in protecting sacred forces, a belief that soaked into every part of ancient Egyptian society, shaping their mindset and their laws. Thanks to the words they left behind, we can peel back the mist of time and see how they wove animal rights, humanity, the sacred and the everyday, laws and customs into the long story of civilization before our own era. Under the blazing blue sky of the Nile Valley, the desert sun sucked every drop of sweat like a giant furnace sprawled across the open land. The massive pyramid construction sites set the stage for two totally different lives. On one side, there were the respected craftsmen and laborers working around the clock, all to build these monuments for the ages. On the other, back in the cool shade of noble houses, pampered cats lounged in comfort, feasting on the very best treats ancient Egypt had to offer. For the workers toiling beneath the pyramids, life was tough, almost like ants under a grinding stone. After years of digging and hauling, all they had to eat was coarse sorghum and beans. Their diets were lacking, and it showed. Many of them looked pale and thin, since the harvest depended on whether the Nile was flooding or not. Food was often so scarce that even the basic nutrition for these hard workers couldn't be guaranteed. Now flip the scene to the nobles' homes, where cats, seen as sacred and symbols of status, lived the life of royalty. These cat lords got carefully prepared gourmet meals, a blend of chicken, fish, and grains that would make any modern pet jealous. With the pharaoh's favor, some households even had servants just to take care of the cat's every need. And when they died, their tombs were fancier than those of most people. Scholars have dug into this harsh and honestly pretty ironic gap. They say the extreme differences in rights found in Egyptian legal texts were actually rooted in the foundations of ancient Egyptian society. Back then, social harmony was believed to be the will of the gods. So customs, traditions, and strict laws were all put in place to make sure every part of society played its role in this divine order. In short, even though the effort and sacrifice of the workers seem heartbreaking from our perspective, back then, it was just seen as part of what was needed to keep ancient Egypt strong and thriving. Those ancient documents weren't just records of lawsuits or finances. They're packed with the real, everyday details of life back then, giving us clues about what it was really like. Pottery, carvings, literature, and decrees from the pharaoh all paint the same picture. The luxury and fun of ancient Egyptian society belonged almost entirely to the elite, who lived in comfort and security. Most regular folks, meanwhile, were like stones in the pyramid, quietly carrying the weight and supporting all that splendor. The Egyptians, full of contradictions and a sense of justice, showed us the tough wisdom of survival. Today, when we look back, the sweaty laborers beneath the pyramids and the pampered cats lounging in the shade have become shining touchstones in the story of history. The greatness and depth of Egyptian civilization is built into every stone in those massive foundations. So what does any of this have to do with us now? After a long day, many of us find comfort coming home to our cats. Maybe the age-old myth of cat worship is still nudging us, reminding us that whether in ancient or modern times, every life, every bit of effort, and every overlooked detail deserve our respect. Reading these rich Egyptian texts, we might realize that the value of life has always been the bedrock of history, and that laws just reflect our efforts to uphold dignity. The giant trees of history may have been cut down, but the roots of civilization keep growing deep in the same ground. Between ancient Egypt and today, those sacred and free holy cats and all the stories wrapped around them are a legacy we should keep alive and cherish. Back in our little time travel through Egyptian culture, we looked at everything. The unique way cats were first tamed, their role as gods, their place of honor in homes, the laws made to protect them, and the stark contrast between hard labor and pampered pets. Clearing away the fog of history, we see Egyptian culture's one-of-a-kind aesthetics and values, where cats, whether carved in stone, painted, or even mummified, were not just worshipped, but deeply woven into daily and spiritual life. This chapter, by comparing then and now, digs into why our attitudes toward cats have changed. First, we have to admit that the bond between ancient Egyptians and cats, whether rooted in religion or just a natural appreciation for their qualities, was both material and spiritual. Now it's different. Sure, pet cats get gourmet food, balanced diets, fun toys, and medical care, but it feels like we've lost some of the spiritual weight and sense of ritual. Today's house cats are definitely family and give us emotional support, but let's be honest, gone is the thick ritual of ancient times. We don't serve cats to honor their sacrifice anymore. The focus is on their well-being. No need to give or give back. This more equal, give and take relationship is a sign of social progress. Still, here's a question for everyone lost in the modern urban rush. With so little ritual or sense of duty left, do we actually understand what our cats truly want and need? To really get cats, today's cat owners might want to borrow some wisdom from ancient Egypt and rediscover what makes cats special. Back then, cats stood for wisdom, strength, and stability. Those meanings gave them a special place in culture. They became a bridge, connecting ordinary home life to something much bigger and more spiritual. This isn't just about honoring or reviving ancient Egyptian culture. It also creates a long-lasting cultural connection between today's cat lovers and their pets. By comparing the past and present and looking across cultures, we start to understand the deeper meaning and ethics behind why people love their pets. At the same time, the role of cats in human society keeps evolving under the spotlight of each new era. Maybe it's time for us to rethink just how we worship these animals and to learn from the timeless wisdom that's flowed through civilizations. By doing so, maybe the magic of ancient myths can come alive again in our modern world, clearing away confusion and helping us move toward a future shaped by empathy and understanding. This cycle, as the final chapter points out, is something that never really ends. Through thousands of years, the status of cats has risen, fallen, and risen again. always shining bright in the sky of human civilization, from being the sacred animals of ancient Egypt to icons of the internet age. Cats have always played many roles in people's hearts, and that aura of mystique is just as strong as ever, whether we're talking about a mummified cat from long ago or a viral cat meme online. The charm of cats cuts across all time, shaping how we see the world and how we feel. Back in ancient Egypt, cats were seen as extraordinary, even holy symbols that stood for life and death itself. People thought of them as messengers of the sun god Ra, guardians of the home and abundance. Pharaohs and nobles used cats to show off their power and rank. This respect for cats was deeply rooted in a unique mix of faith, daily ritual, and ways of seeing the universe. And as the years have rolled by, the image of the Egyptian cat has changed in form, but never in meaning. It always speaks of the deep connection between cats and people. Today, that trend has hit new heights online. Cats are now internet celebrities, popping up in memes and viral videos, starring in all sorts of creative content. The ancient curiosity around mummified cats has morphed into a whole online culture, with cats at its core. The cats we see on our screens feel like they've busted out of the constraints of time, becoming a bridge between us and ancient cultures. Instant sharing and interaction have turned cat adoration into something fully woven into how we live. Cats are true treasures of modern culture, but this happy picture also brings up some big questions. In this digital mirror world, do we really understand or respect the true nature of cats? What is it about cat worship that's so persistent, so easily reborn from age to age? What underlying psychological needs does this fulfill? And how do we actually satisfy them? Maybe to find the answer, we need to go back to our roots and connect all the dots from earlier chapters, from religious devotion and social structure to the reach of modern tech. We retrace the journey that's bound cats and humans together by digging into how we interact with cats today. Maybe we can borrow some wisdom from ancient Egyptian ways and build even better bonds with our modern feline friends. No matter how much our culture changes over time, one thing never does: the powerful bond between people and cats. The way humans have elevated cats through myth isn't just some random religious idea. It's a deep, emotional thing, rooted in ritual, connection, and shared meaning. So as we reach the end of this book, pausing in our internet age and looking back, here's an invitation. Every cat lover should start a soul-to-soul conversation with their cat. Explore what's really going on inside. Listen for echoes from 1,000 years ago and breathe new life into those radiant old legends. What truly draws us in isn't just how fast cat videos go viral, but something buried deeper, that immortal respect and pure love we feel for every cat calmly grooming itself in a sunbeam. London, March 1850. Rain fell like spider webs soaked in coal dust, sticking to the window of an old bookstore on St. Martin's Lane, 17-year-old Tom, the shop boy on his tiptoes, scrubbing the glass, flinched as a deep green book with gold lettering tumbled down, smacking his paste-smeared apron. From its cracked spine fluttered a faded letter. The ink had bled into pale blue clouds, but he caught the last line. If I can't lie beside you in the grave, I'd rather walk the earth an empty shell. It was a first edition of Jane Eyre. Tom wouldn't learn until later that what his fingers brushed then was the sharpest edge of the whole Victorian era's romantic fantasy, those love stories that made ladies blush and whisper over tea, those passages that made gentlemen pull out pocket watches in their clubs and mutter, "Damn it, this burns hotter than brandy," all wrapped up in a carefully spun sugar coating. Miss Mary Smith's diary lay hidden in an old cardboard box at the British Library. A textile worker from Yorkshire in 1845. She'd pressed a dried sprig of heather between the pages of Shirley when it was new, a secret little token for Charlotte Bronte, whose book claimed love leaps over class walls. But in real life, the ink was barely dry on Mary's marriage papers when her father slapped the mortgage papers for the factory's new steam engine right on top. The neighbors called it a good match. The mill owner's son had 3 acres, enough to let old Smith pay off his £8 17 shillings, $40 bank debt before retiring. Mary wrote, "I counted the calluses on his hands, same as mine, but we never held hands, down at the marriage registry on Charing Cross Road." An old ledger from 1837 sat heavy under its gilded Victoria. 720 couples' names lined up like soldiers, while Dickens wrote in Oliver Twist about Nancy dying for love. The ledger's numbers whispered secrets. 82 brides were between 14 and 16, their husbands 12 years older on average. 53 were cousin marriages, merging shipping shares in Liverpool. And 17 brides suddenly changed their surnames 3 days before the wedding daughters of merchants buying knightly titles to match noble blood. When little Dorrit finally got together with Arthur Clenham in the novel, over 300 unsent love letters gathered dust in an East London poorhouse, written by mill workers, dock hands, and chimney sweeps on greasy machine rags and tea-stained paper scraps. They promised, "Soon as I save £5, I'll rent a room with a window for us." Or, "You said you liked roses. I planted 3 by the wall. Soon as the first bloom opens, I'm coming for you." But the 1841 labor wage survey told the real story. Men averaged 7 shillings a week, women 4 shillings 6pence. A room with a window cost 2 shillings a week. Rose seedlings cost a shilling. To save up for a decent wedding, they'd need 40 weeks straight, no sickness, no layoffs, no wage theft by the foreman, up in the Brontes' Haworth attic, while the sisters wrote of souls resonating above all else. Their neighbor, Mrs. Colton, was stuffing her daughters' wedding invitations into the fireplace. The girl had fallen for the family coachman. Mrs. Colton pulled out the Derby peerage, pointing to entries listing annual incomes over £3,000. $15,000. Your father's coal mine needs shares in that railway company, she said. And the railway boss has a 20-year-old son. The last invitation curled into a black butterfly in the flames. The gold script, sincerely request the honor, still visible on its wings. Later, the old bookstore owner told Tom the letter in that Jane Eyre came from a governess named Emily. She'd married the parish vicar in 1848. Even grading essays titled "The Most Romantic Thing" on her wedding day, her husband preached that love is God's gift. But the marriage contract stated, wife's dowry of £300, $1,500, under husband's full control. If wife seeks divorce, she must repay husband £500, $2,500, plus all wedding jewelry. Emily wrote the letter 3 years later, just after a miscarriage, while her husband discussed more suitable social engagements with the local squire's widow. The final words were shaky, like flowers beaten down by wind and rain. Books say love breaks down walls, but my walls are a £300 dowry, a £500 fine, and my own face growing thinner every morning in the mirror. The rain kept falling as Tom shelved the Jane Eyre on the top shelf. Through the water-streaked glass, he imagined countless Marys, Emilys, and Colton girls weeping over novels in attics, twisting lace gloves at weddings, tallying their husbands' assets by lamplight. Those love stories that swept England off its feet, they were like London's gas lamps. Flickering shadows stretching long and thin, never quite lighting up the real breath and pain in the corners. Years later, Tom became a reporter. He'd write, "We swoon over Jane and Rochester's stormy embrace, but forget that Victorian marriage registries churned out contracts colder than ledgers. We cry for little Dorrit's devotion, yet miss the factory girls hiding half-written love letters against their chests, while shuttles tore their fingers' words that never reached where they belonged." That worn Jane Eyre still sits on St. Martin's Lane, its cover faded to dove gray. Sometimes an old lady flips to the letter page and sighs. How romantic love was back then. But lean closer, and you'll see tear stains nearly erasing a tiny scrawl at the margin. Dearest, I couldn't afford roses, only heather, but heather thorns cut deeper. London, 1852. 17-year-old Emily stood before her bedroom mirror, fingers picking at the oak bedposts' carvings. Her mother stood behind her, gripping a corset of whalebone stays. Its ivory satin gleamed cold in the dawn light. "Suck it in," came her mother's tight string voice. Emily obeyed, ribs contracting as the bones beneath the fabric clicked softly, bones she'd found by the Thames last spring, silver bleached on the mudflats. Back then, she'd thought they looked like unwritten poetry. Now, nature's poetry had become her cage. As the first lace pulled taut, Emily's temples throbbed. Her mother's hands darted through the crisscrossed ribbons, stepping back after every knot to squint-check the line from Emily's waist to the floor. Your cousin measured 18 inches at her wedding. Her mother's nails dug into Emily's back. show up slack as a dairymaid, and Mr. Hawk's second son won't spare you a biscuit. Emily recalled that son at last week's ball. Greased hair, watery eyes, spitting as he bragged about crop yields. When she'd mentioned Keats, he'd asked, which tenant farmer's he? The corset's top edge jabbed her stomach, her third new one this year. Last winter, her bust had grown 2 inches overnight. Her mother had ripped the old corset to shreds, tossing it into the fireplace. Flames had devoured the satin lilies of the valley, like they'd devoured her 13th birthday copy of Jane Eyre, the book where Jane tells Rochester we are equal, now locked in an oak cabinet, the key dangling from her father's leather belt. Breathlessness crawled from her ribs to her throat. Emily remembered her cousin Helen, a nurse at St. Bartholomew's. Helen's letter described ladies' complaints from tight lacing, dizziness, coughing blood, even sudden collapse. One factory girl's daughter was brought in with ribs stabbing through her lung. Her mother had used rope instead of whalebone, saying bones cost too much, just pull tighter. The mirror blurred, but Emily saw other truths. Last month in Hyde Park, 3 girls in bloomers chased balloons, their waists swaying free as willow branches. Flower seller Mary at the corner, laughing full-mouthed in her coarse apron, saying, "Love, it's when he lifts my buckets, extra easy." But none of this was for proper young ladies. At the afternoon tea in Hawk Manor, Emily perched on a rose-pink sofa, corset stays grinding into her spine. When the younger Mr. Hawk offered tea, her fingers flinched from the cup handle. A lady holds it with 3 fingers. Her mother had coached, like cradling a fragile dream. "Heard you like reading." Mr. Hawk's voice startled her. "My sister's got some book, The Subjection of Women, ranting about feelings, not meant to be tamed by marriage." Mad talk. His laugh sounded like shattering glass. "But girls like you stick to the Lady's Guide to Perfect Manners." Riding home at dusk along the Thames, Emily secretly loosened the top corset laces. River wind rushed in, stinging her eyes. It carried coal smoke, dockworkers' shouts, newsboys screaming. Cholera got 10 more, but not one whisper of freedom. Across the carriage, her mother napped, a satisfied smile on her lips. The Hawks had proposed a wedding date. John Stuart Mill wrote in The Subjection of Women, "Society binds women with velvet chains, making them mistake the shackles for love." Emily never read those words, but she knew when she'd wear that lace-drenched wedding gown. The whalebone corset would be sewn into its lining an invisible cage, and what they called love, it had shrunk into a measuring tape around her waist, an abacus tallying her dowry, the daily dawn command. Suck it in, tighter. When night bled through the window, Emily pulled out the old handkerchief hidden under her mattress. Tom from the corner bookstore gave it to her last year. His fingers always smelled like printer's ink. His writing was still faint on the cloth. "Soon as I save enough, we'll get a place with a bay window. You can read whatever you want." But yesterday, Tom said he was leaving for a textile mill in Manchester. "Your mother's right." His voice rasped like a rusty gear. "I can't give you the respectable life you deserve. Church bells rolled through the evening air, counting the chimes. Emily remembered another line from Cousin Helen's letter. Ribs warped by corsets. One day, they'll punch right through the cage. She pressed a hand to her waist, where a whalebone stayed dug into her skin, like secret code. Maybe years from now, when girls breathed free, they'd remember this pain beneath the satin, not just a body trapped, but a whole era misunderstanding love, where women's feelings got pruned into dutiful wives, where heartbeats had to march to society's drum. What they called love, just another custom-fitted corset. Beautiful, deadly. The sky over East London was still pitch black when coal carts, rumbling over cobblestones, jolted Ellie awake. She groped her way off the iron bed frame. It groaned under her weight. This bed was hers and her sister's. Last winter, her sister coughed blood and died. The empty side still held patched-up quilts. Tom's letter lay on the windowsill, its edges frayed from handling, the ink on his last promise. Soon as I save £5, I'll marry you, was smudged from her touch. By 6 sharp, when the factory whistle ripped through the morning fog, Ellie was already at the mill gates. She counted the line, 20 new girls at least, eyes raw and red. The night shift got laid off. Boss bought new steam looms. One worker could run 6 machines now. Ellie's fingers clenched around the half-loaf of black bread in her apron pocket. Tom slipped it to her yesterday. He'd sneaked out from the ironworks night shift at 3 a.m., his palm gritty with slag when he pressed the bread into her hand. 10 years back, things were different. Ellie's dad was a tailor then, working by hand. The whole family crammed into an attic room. Her mom running a hat shop below. She and her little brother learned pattern cutting beside the sewing machine. Evenings, Dad would fetch hot peas from the corner stall. Mom would braid their hair with shop ribbons. Tom's dad was the cobbler next door. The boys were always tearing down the alley, not caring about horse muck on their boots. Then the first smokestack went up east of town. Everything changed. Dad's handmade suits got no orders. Mom's hat shop got crushed by factory-made ribbon flowers. Her brother started at the match factory, aged 8, phosphorus, eating his nails green. Last month, Tom got moved to the ironworks forging shop. Ellie saw it once. Heat waves punched the air, sparks flying wild. Men's sweat sizzled on the floor. The machine roar left her ears ringing for days. Tom's hands were blistered raw. He set apprentices, pulled in 4 shillings a month now. But rent was up. Bread was dear. Even cheap candles cost half a penny. Saw old Jones' boy get hitched last week. Tom mumbled over a cold potato in the alley. They took a loan shark's deal for the bed. Bride wore a flour sack veil. Split up after 3 months. His wife started at the mill. Outturned him. Said she couldn't take his drinking fists. No more. The middle class parlor smelled like jasmine tea. Clara Hawkins stared at the sugar cube in her saucer as her mother's voice ticked like clockwork. Mr. Wentworth owns 3 cotton mills in Liverpool, made 15% on that canal deal last year. Clara's fingers rubbed the whalebone stays of her corset, that 30-pound cage digging into her ribs. Last Tuesday at the ball, when Mr. Wentworth's watch chain brushed her hand, she'd caught lemon scent on his cufflinks. Not love, just the smell of old ledger books and fresh varnish. Clara's diary hid in her dresser's bottom drawer, pressed around a dried cornflower picked 3 years ago, walking with Charlie in Hyde Park. Charlie studied painting at the Royal Academy, but her mother said artists make less than dockhands. Last month, his final letter came. He was off to India to paint colonial governors. The postmark bled red like a smudged tear. Now Mother combed through the Derby peerage, highlighting eligible bachelors' incomes and property lists in red ink. Clara counted 3 exclamation points by Wentworth's name, scribbled with dowry applicable toward investments. City Hall's marriage registers didn't lie. In 1830, East End workers married at 22 on average. By 1850, 27, preachers mourned young people losing the guts to love. But nobody mentioned mill girls working 69-hour weeks just to buy 15 loaves of bread. Nobody said ironworks apprentices got thrown out the gate if machines took their fingers, and nobody did the math. Saving £5 for a wedding, that meant 10 months' wages with no food, no rent, no sick days. Middle-class marriages were pure accounting. Times classifieds listed lady of refinement, seeking union, followed by £3,000 dowry inkle, Notting Hill property, gentleman of standing desire's companion, demanded £5,000 portion, childlessness acceptable. Law firms saw prenups grow thicker every year. One old solicitor recalled a calfskin-bound monster, 17 pages, covering everything from silverware to who kept the lapdog. At the mill today, Ellie miscounted the spools 3 times. The foreman's wooden ruler cracked across her knuckles. On break, she pulled out Tom's letter. Sweat had warped the paper, blurring soon as I save £5. I'm marrying you into a blue stain. She stared at smokestacks, weaving black nets across the sky, remembering childhood fairy tales calling love rose-colored clouds. Now she knew better. When chimneys cough up crushed breadcrumbs and worn-out souls and counted pennies, love letters are just scraps blowing through the coal dust. Gone with the Wind, spring 1862, in a Kensington oak box, an unsent letter curled for 40 years, smelling of mildew. The writer, 27-year-old governess Clara Hobbs. Coffee-ringed tear stains bled at the edges where her pen stabbed through the paper at the word love. Pressed inside, half a dried heather blossom, tiny script on a petal read, A.W., initials of the young lawyer who always sat in pew 7 at St. Mary's Wednesday organ recitals. Clara wrote, I wanted to say, when you picked up my dropped Pride and Prejudice last Tuesday, your fingertips on my wrist burned hotter than 3-day coal. But all I said was pardon me like you were the milkman. She never knew Edward Walker, that lawyer, who tied his cravat too tight, kept a sonnets of Shakespeare in his desk drawer. Dates marked each love poem. Nov. 15, 1861. Clara chose my walnut paperweight at the Charity Bazaar. Feb. 3, 1862. She passed my window under a blue silk umbrella, snowmelt dripping from the ribs. This isn't some novelist's invention. In Victorian private archives, These emotional codebooks were everywhere. Page 47 of Debrets' Etiquette laid it out plain. A lady expressing regard must substitute pleasure for delight, describe talents as commendable, and for deeper sentiments, employ metaphors like a concern as gentle as spring morning mist. The 1858 Young Lady's Guide to Society was stricter. When conversing with a gentleman, maintain eye contact for no more than 3 seconds. Smile no wider than 2 fingers' breadth at the corners, and always precede the word love with buffers, like perhaps or possibly. These rules were like invisible tailors, cramming raw feelings into corset-tight boxes. Working-class Ruth may griped in her 1865 diary. My John got his hand crushed at the mill. I wanted to visit him at hospital, but the neighbors said an unmarried girl alone in a ward wasn't proper. I sent hot broth with my sister and a note saying wishing you speedy recovery. What I screamed inside was, I don't even know how much salt to put in bread without you. Middle-class bank clerk Henry Carter stated in divorce court. 7 years married. My wife never once said, I miss you to my face. She'd mail pressed shirts when I traveled with notes saying all well at home. But when I had a 103 fever in Liverpool last year, all I got was her fancy script, writing weather turning, dress warmly. The real kicker, even love letters became paperwork, needing proofreading. The British Library holds 24 courtship letters from the 1870s, each reading like grammar school assignments. Your countenance recalls the roses in chapel stained glass, or afternoons taking tea with you are more anticipated than the latest Times serial. One Margaret, replying to her suitor, split I love you into 3 bullet points. The violets you sent recall my childhood garden. Reading Jane Eyre lately, I often remember your talk of souls being equal, and God willing, I would share each matins and evensong with you. This polite silence acted like slow poison, turning the closest people into strangers. The Lancet ran a case in 1868. 34-year-old housewife Emily Parker was treated for hysteria. She told the doctor her husband left warm milk by her bed nightly, yet in 5 years of marriage, never asked if she liked honey in it. I tried drawing a tiny flower on the cup bottom to hint I wanted it sweet. She wept, tears smudging the diagnosis of emotional muteness on the chart. Next night, he put in 2 sugar cubes, shaped like flowers, thought it was decoration. The cruelest twist when this restraint seeped into marriage. Homes meant to be havens became cold battlefields. In London's 1873 High Court divorce records, 37% of petitioners cited inability to communicate feelings, while baffled husbands countered, what more do they want? I put food on the table. I'm home every night. I buy silk gloves for holidays. They never knew the notes hidden in their wives' dresser drawers. Screamed, I don't want gloves. I want you to hold my hand when my cramps are bad. Not holiday gifts, just a how was your day. On a Tuesday, Clara Hobbs never sent that letter. In 1863, she married the pharmacist her father picked. At the wedding, she wore the pearl brooch Edward sent passed along by her sister as a congratulatory gift with the note, "May you always be as peaceful as you are today." Not until 1923, when her granddaughter cleaned out the attic, was the letter found. A shaky postscript added decades later read, "40 years on, I finally see all the love we saved back then could have filled every ripple in the Thames." Victorians locked their feelings away like jewelry boxes, thinking it kept them pure. What they didn't figure, the tighter you lock it, the fainter the heartbeat gets, until all that's left is a polite echo under crystal chandeliers, between clinking teacups. In every rewritten love letter freezing into a desert with no end in sight. London fog in August 1848 hung thick and nasty, like a sour water-soaked rag, choking the Thames with rot. Mary Hawkins' wooden clogs slapped the cobblestones, splashing mud onto her faded apron, her badge from the laundry house, and the wall between her and Tom. Tom Reed was Old Brown, the chemist's apprentice, living above the shop on Fleet Street. Mary usually only saw him bent over his work through the window when dropping off linens. His lab coat sleeves stained light brown like withered cornflowers. Once, he steadied her tipped laundry cart. His fingers brushed her hand raw from years in lye water. She couldn't sleep that night, scribbling in her patched cloth diary. His hands were warmer than mine, like bricks left in the sun, but by Victorian rules, a chemist's boy and a laundry girl, that should have stopped at "not appropriate." Mary's landlady nagged. "A proper girl waits for the church choir's John, at least a carpenter." Tom's boss, Old Brown, stroked his goatee. Mary, the silk merchant's daughter, her dowry could buy 2 apothecaries. Their love letters hid under Mary's pillow, wrapped in old newsprint, the handwriting clumsy. Even the word love looked uncertain, because Tom said the Ladies' Guide insisted unmarried folks needed chaperones for letters. They swapped notes by moonlight in the laundry alley. Then cholera hit, and the rules went out the window. The first body turned up in St. Giles just as Mary was scrubbing sheets by the river. The water looked green as rotten spinach soup. Dead rats floating belly up. She suddenly remembered Tom saying last week, "Sewage is backing into the wells. Drink it. You'll be sick as a dog." That evening, she didn't go back to the laundry. Clutching half a stale loaf, she ran to Fleet Street. Outside St. Bartholomew's Hospital, she found Tom, his white coat gone, sleeves rolled up over a rough shirt, helping carry a twitching boy on a plank. Mary, his voice, shouting her name, had lost its usual carefulness. "Help me pass the medicine." That night, they worked in a makeshift plague shed, just tarps and scrap wood. Rain leaked through, soaking the straw on the floor. Mary gave water to the sick. Tom mixed powders to stop the runs. Old Brown's shop was shut tight. He used every herb he'd saved, even the chamomile meant for headaches. A lady in an expensive velvet dress had been dumped in the alley. Mary put her own apron under the woman's head. Tom knelt in the mud, tying a tourniquet. "Your pearls are lovely, ma'am. When you're well, I'll find find you a proper box. Later, the woman cried, gripping Mary's hand. My own maid ran off. But you're kinder than family. That middle-class reserve melted away in the cholera. Ladies who'd only stirred tea with silver spoons at balls now brought their own blankets for the sick. Factory bosses who'd sneered about the lower orders sent medicine wagons. Even the scent. James's vicar traded his robes for a shovel to bury bodies. The good book don't teach how to put on airs with the dying, he said. Tom's landlady, who once sniffed at his poverty, now brought hot stew to the plague shed daily. Chunks of salt pork bobbing in the broth. Every soul saved counts, she muttered. Mary and Tom's hands stayed clasped after that. She wiped mud from his medicine jars. He smoothed her rain-soaked hair. She shoved her last crust of bread at him. He slipped peppermint drops into her apron pocket dug from the back of the medicine cabinet. One per dawn, keeping vigil over a little girl barely breathing. Tom rubbed her cold hand and said, I was gonna save up. Then tell old Brown I'm marrying Mary from the laundry. Mary's tears hit the straw pallet, mixing with rain and disinfectant. I was gonna put my savings in too. Open a little shop, you with your remedies, me with my wash tubs. When death finally receded, London's cobblestones got scrubbed bone white. Mary later found a dog-eared lady's guide to manners in Tom's shop. Tucked inside, Tom's scrawl on a scrap of paper. Turns out the book never said loving someone means passing medicine in a plague shed, wiping tears in a downpour, or hiding peppermints in an apron pocket. They did marry, a simple affair in the Little St. Giles Chapel. The velvet dress lady they'd saved stood as witness. Mary's dowry was a patchwork wash tub. Tom's offering, half a cupboard of herbs. Neighbors clucked it was all wrong, but Mary knew the truth. All the romance scribbled in books or whispered in parlors couldn't touch that bowl of stew in the plague shed. Their hands laced together in the rainy dark, or hearing, I'm marrying you, spoken straight into death's face. Victorian poets kept spinning tales of rose-tinted love, but the last page of Mary's cloth-bound diary held this: love ain't flowers stitched on fancy paper. It's the warmth that didn't wash away in the cholera floods. Late night in St. Gallen Abbey, old brother Eberhard's oil lamp flickered on his desk, making the gold leaf cover of the Song of Roland shimmer. He just reached the page where Roland blows his horn at Roncesvalles, its sound shaking the valleys for miles, when an owl's screech outside made the candlewick spit. Squinting, the old monk pulled a faded linen bundle from his deepest drawer scraps of a knight's diary found last month in a collapsed cellar crack. The ink was rust brown, but still legible. Joints ache too much to grip my sword. Spent half a sack of rye on the Countess's embroidered handkerchief. At 12, Eberhard had seen a minstrel perform Roland in the market square. Farmers in rough tunics, aproned housewives, even church scullions stood on tiptoe. The bard strummed his lute. Roland's silver armor flowed like the Milky Way in moonlight. Durendal, his holy sword, shone with enemy blood brighter than a duchess's rubies. Young Eberhard, clutching his moldy black bread, saw the crowd's odd faces. For the first time, night seemed edged in gold, like St. George's billowing cloak in the altar painting, hooves even treading clouds. But these diary scraps ripped off that gilded edge. Their author, Raymond, a minor knight from Burgundy, wrote on some rainy day in 1187, "Spent today breaking the Lord's new warhorse, armors crushing my shoulders, took a blunted lance to the gut in yesterday's. Tourney hurts to breathe, but that's nothing. Last month in Aquitaine, a new squire buckled his knee guards wrong, fell off his horse, knee shattered. The surgeon said amputate. He chewed clean through the leather strap. They gave him to bite." Eberhard recalled how Roland, arrow-stricken, stood firm as an oak. Raymond's ink bled with sweat. "They say knights must be stone. Stone doesn't burn with fever. Last week, delirious, I dreamt my armor melted, pouring molten iron down my throat. I thrashed on the straw. The nun said God tests my courage. God doesn't know how lice bite under mail." Another page hit harder, ink smeared by tears. Spring gifts for Lady Marguerite. 3 bunches Provence lavender, half a block Venetian glass, silver buckles. The steward said this would feed my tenant's family half a year. But the lady says love must be pure as morning dew. So last year's, well, money's gone. In her rose garden, she pointed to a dent in my breastplate. "A metal one for me." "Yes, my lady," I said. "No one knows a panicked ox plowing the Lord's wheat made that dent last month." These words were rusty needles, popping Eberhard's nightly bubble. He remembered 30 years back, a wounded knight carried into the abbey. When they removed his armor, the monks gasped, shoulder bones jutting like broken chicken wings, kneecaps sanded down to teacup-sized calluses, finger joints twisted like trampled vines. 20 years in mail, the old abbot sighed, touching the deformities. 8 hours a day minimum, joints crushed by iron rings, muscles locked forever, holding a shield. They think they're forging heroes. They're forging walking suits of armor. But the song of Roland said his armor was light as down, hard as diamond. It didn't say that down weighed 60 pounds, that wearing it 2 hours in summer, sweat pooled inside the mail and dripped from your boots. It didn't say diamond plate had gaps wide enough for a dagger. At the joints gaps, Saladin's Mamluks stabbed through at Arsuf. Eberhard closed the song of Roland. The gilded Roland figure blurred into shadow. Moonlight crept across Raymond's page, illuminating a heavily crossed outline. "They sing of my armor, but don't ask if the bones beneath ache. They praise my love, but don't see the acres I sold to buy it." Eberhard understood. The rapt market crowds, the nobles reading epics in their castles, they never loved real knights. They loved the phantom in their heads. Silver armor, white horse, dying for love and glory. The real knight, a prisoner locked inside that phantom, grinding his bones in iron, emptying his purse for love, smiling, "Behold, this is glory." Wind whistled through the window crack, rustling the pages. Eberhard shivered, reaching to steady the wobbling candle. He knocked over the song of Roland. The spine cracked. A sprig of dried lavender fluttered out its faint scent, hanging in the air. It smelled like bravas. It smelled like debt, just like the 3 bunches on Raymond's list. For Lady Marguerite, Flanders, late summer 1375. The training field, baked bone white. William de Montfort knelt in the sand, forehead pressed to his breastplate. Each breath like swallowing fire. The linen towel under his mail shirt was a sopping rag, leather straps cinching his plate armor dug red trenches into his wrists. This custom suit cost his father 3 acres of vineyards. Now it felt like a red-hot iron shell, crushing him into the dirt. 3 days ago at the tournament, a shoulder plate jammed mid-lance charge should have been a perfect strike. Instead, he and his horse plowed into the mud. Ladies tittered behind hands. His lord's voice cut low. Can't even run 3 laps in full kit. Next battle, you won't have the strength to draw your sword. Now, he got the sting in those words. The armor weighed 28 kilos, like hauling half a sack of flour. But flour didn't sear your skin, didn't pinch bloody welds at the joints, didn't make every step feel like wading through wet cotton. He remembered his first suit at 15. Getting knighted at church steel felt like God's embrace. Now, 24, he knew the weight of every piece. Breastplate, 15 pounds. Pauldron's shoulders, 6.5 pounds. Arms, 4.5 each. Leg plates, 17.5 total. Gauntlets, 3 pounds. These numbers were carved into his spine. Every step screamed, "You're not a man. You're a walking frame for the armor." Old Raymond, the training master, always said, "A true knight's bones must be harder than his steel." But last month in the stables, William saw Raymond stripping down. The old man's lower back was bruised deep purple. Rib flesh under the armor plates shone like polished wood. At 20, could ride 20 miles in full plate. At 40, Raymond wheezed. "Now, I need 2 squires just to get it off. Can't roll over in bed. Feels like ground glass in the joints." Worse was the breathing or lack of it. Plate armor looked sealed. It was a walking steam bath. William tried stuffing mint leaves inside, poured ice water down his mail, but under a hot sun, cool tricks just turned to swamp. Last autumn siege, he lay in ambush 3 hours. When the charge horn blew, sweat under his visor blinded him. Mail links rubbed raw, rash blooming on his skin, reaching the castle well. He ripped off his helmet, boiling sweat, and rust taste flooded his throat. He collapsed like a fish on a riverbank. The infirmary friar kept a battered logbook of armor sickness. Knight John, left knee deformed, knee plate crushed his ligaments for years. Knight Roger, collarbone jutting out, breastplate straps dug permanent grooves. Worst was young Arnaud, chasing horse thieves last summer, passed out in the sun, came back covered in blisters, raving water. Water. The friar called it cage fever, armor trapping body heat, slow roasting a man alive. His squire, Tom, always hissed through his teeth, helping him undress. William's back muscles were rutted like plowed earth from armor straps. Shoulder blades jutted like sharp stones. Yesterday, Tom sponged him down, feeling the right shoulder bone higher than the left. "My lord, shoulder plate need adjusting." William stayed silent. He knew the cost. Steel for 1 knee plate equals 2 cows. Adjusting the joint hinges needed a Bruges armorer. Price equals 6 months bread for Tom's family. The wind on the training field was thick with the smell of hay. As William slowly pushed himself up with his spear, the greaves rubbed his calves raw, and his knee popped. He knew that sound all too well, like an old wooden door creaking on its hinges. Off in the distance, the Lord's horn sounded. Time to get back at it. He took a deep breath. His throat was bone dry behind the visor, but his hands kept tightening the buckle on his chest plate, all on their own. After all, without this armor, he didn't even qualify as a knight. With it, though, he felt like a horse in shackles, just dragging all that steel forward. By the time the sun was dipping west, William had finally finished his third round of sprints. He collapsed on the ground, helmet rolling to the side, letting his sweat-soaked blonde hair spill out. Tom ran over to help him up, but William waved him off. He just stared at his own hands. Years gripping spear and straps had left his knuckles twisted, gnarled up like old tree roots. A gust flicked up the hem of his chainmail, showing the pale pink scars on his leg, the marks from where his armor plates cracked and cut him last winter. "We're upping the sessions tomorrow." The Lord's voice floated over from far away. William looked at the blazing sunset clouds and suddenly remembered being 12, squatting in the smithy, watching his father's new armor come out of the forge. The molten steel glowed blue in the crucible, like stars falling into the fire. Now, running a hand over his own chest plate, he could feel the leftover heat of the day still trapped in the metal, burning his palm. Turns out, the sharpest thing wasn't the sword, it was this armor, biting into him inch by inch, turning him from a living man into just another piece of steel. It was late autumn, 1294, and gold leaves carpeted the oak woods in France's Champagne region. Gerard, a 23-year-old squire, crouched by the campfire, the breeze making his parchment rustle. He'd already crossed out the third line, ink from his quill bleeding out like blood on a wound. The letter was supposed to begin, "To my brightest star, the gracious Lady Isabel." But as soon as he wrote "star," he remembered last week, bringing rose water to her. Old Hugo, the butler, had eyed the patches on his mail, tapped his crystal goblet with a silver spoon, and drawled, "Surely the knight's devotion should be worth more than the oats in the stables. No, that's the #1 rule of courtly love. Your crush has to be a noblewoman above your own station." Gerard's father was a minor lord, barely third class, while Isabel was a distant cousin of the Duke of Burgundy. A single pearl on her dress could buy him a couple sets of horseshoes. The troubadour Bertrand was always singing in the castle hall, "Love is a knight's badge of honor, meant for the moon up in the clouds." But Gerard knew that moon wasn't for just anyone to gaze at. Just last spring, the blacksmith's son Pierre sneaked a love poem to a lady-in-waiting and ended up spending half a month in the dungeon. He came out with his right pinky forever curled like a hook. The campfire snapped and popped, sparks scorching the edge of his parchment. Gerard remembered the tournament last month. He'd gone all out to win 3 matches, her silk scarf tied to his lance. When he knelt, filthy and bleeding, at her feet. Her skirt hem brushed past his face like a feather. But later that same night, the butler brought a message. My lady says real affection deserves a token worthy of her. So Gerard sold off his mother's silver cross and bought a piece of lapis lazuli from the east, wrapped it in velvet, and sent it to her. It was something even his father hadn't touched, not even when he bought back the family lands. This was the second unspoken rule. Restraint is more valuable than open passion. Ballads always talk about love as sweet torment. But Gerard had counted. He'd written Isabel 17 letters and only ever gotten one reply. It was the size of a playing card, made of vellum, and all it said was, "May your loyalty be as strong as iron," sealed with her iris emblem. He kept that scrap close to his chest until sweat blurred the ink. But one morning, he found out the truth. The handwriting wasn't even hers. Old Hugo, the butler, let it slip after too much wine. Lady Isabel got over 20 love letters a day. She didn't have time to write them herself. Even more suffocating was the twisted idea that beauty comes from suffering. Gerard's mentor, Sir Raymond, an old knight past his prime, always said, "The deeper the love, the sweeter the wound." So when Gerard caught a cold writing love tokens late into the night and couldn't sleep from coughing, Raymond clapped him on the back and said, "That's love testing your resolve." And when Gerard took on the dangerous job of escorting a merchant caravan just to afford a birthday gift for Isabel, a string of Venetian glass beads costing 12 gold coins, and got slashed across the arm by bandits, the castle minstrels wrote a song about it. Behold brave Gerard, bleeding for his lady's smile. But no one ever asked Gerard if he actually loved Isabel, or maybe more importantly, did he love her? Or did he love being the knight chosen by a noblewoman? He remembered the first time he saw her, crouched by a fountain, teasing a white peacock, pearls shimmering in her hair, so brightly it hurt to look. But later, he noticed she smiled at every suitor the same way, softer for young viscounts, flirtier with rich merchants' sons, and for guys like him, minor nobles with nothing but pride and debt. Her smile felt like inspecting a prize horse up for auction. The cruel part was, this kind of love was never mutual. Isabel could swap admirers like dresses. One winter, she wept over a minstrel's poem. The next spring pinned Gerard's lapis brooch to her gown. But once a knight was chosen, he had to prove his devotion for life. Sir Raymond, still writing love poems to a long-dead countess well into his 60s, claimed, "My love will outlast her tombstone." But Gerard once saw him drunk and sobbing, admitting she hadn't even remembered his full name. Wind kicked up fallen leaves as Gerard finally finished his letter. The last line read, "May my pain become lace on your dress, forever near your glory." He folded the letter into the shape of a rose and tucked it into a leather pouch. Tomorrow morning, he'd ride 30 miles to deliver it along with half a sack of freshly hunted pheasants. Chinese letter suggested pheasants were in season, hinting at what would impress her. Firelight glinted off the old bruise beneath his chainmail. A tournament injury from last month that still ached, but compared to the tightness in his chest, it barely registered. Suddenly, he remembered something old Raymond used to say. Armor can be taken off, but love's chains grow into your bones. The paper rose swayed gently in the pouch, like a flower that would never bloom, as Gerard stared at the lights of the distant castle. He realized those grand, poetic tales of love, sung like stars in songs, were really just golden collars around a man's neck. The fancier they looked, the harder they choked. It was spring 1347, and Jean de Montfort, a knight from the Champagne region of France, stood outside a blacksmith's shop clutching a worn ledger, knuckles white. He'd just been handed the price for a new set of armor, 3 gold écus, enough to feed 30 peasant families for a year. Last year, he'd already sold his mother's silver chalice to win the favor of a lady-in-waiting to a countess. Now, he couldn't even afford horseshoes without borrowing from the local miller. This wasn't some glorious scene from a chivalric tale. It was a raw, real struggle for survival. Medieval plate armor was way more than just battlefield gear. It was a money-eating monster. Getting a custom-fitted set made could take a blacksmith half a year, and just the steel alone cost as much as 100 sheep. Keep in mind, an average peasant family might make only 2 gold écus all year, and that's before you even get to maintenance. After every tournament or battle, you had to sand out the scratches on the plates, grease the leather joints with animal fat to keep them from cracking, and replace the cotton liners inside your chainmail every few months. Jean wrote in his journal, "Spent half a pig fixing a crack in my breastplate, enough bread to feed Margot's kids for 3 months. These costs were like invisible termites, slowly chewing through a night's savings, and behind the romantic veil of courtly love, cold, hard math, love in the royal court wasn't about mutual feelings. It was a fancy, expensive ritual. Knights had to gift noblewomen velvet cloaks embroidered with their own coat of arms, which took silk from 20 silkworm cocoons. Where ribbons dyed her favorite color at tournaments, if it was cornflower blue, that meant imported indigo dye. And sometimes even hire minstrels to write sonnets in their honor. Jean remembered paying a musician 5 bushels of wheat just for a cheesy poem called Moonlight, and roses for a countess's maid. The worst part, you couldn't look like you were struggling. If you seemed hesitant or cheap, people would say you weren't truly devoted. One guy, Sir Robert, once gave a necklace with slightly flawed pearls, and the lady publicly mocked him as a penniless wretch who couldn't even fatten a chicken. And he never lived it down in noble circles. Meanwhile, the Lord's whip never stopped cracking. Jean had to man the border watchtower 3 days a month, and every time he went to war, he had to bring his own armor, horse, and 2 squires. That meant feeding the squires, buying oats for the horse out of his own pocket. Last fall, during a minor skirmish with Burgundy, his vambrace got cracked. Fixing it cost him enough to buy half an acre. His horse got grazed by an arrow, and treating it with herbs for 2 weeks nearly forced him to pawn the kitchen pot. Then there was managing his land. The tiny estate he owned barely had 20 peasant households. The rent they paid barely covered the church tithe, and what little was left had to cover taxes, donations for church repairs, and the occasional bard passing through claiming to sing of his noble deeds. You couldn't exactly send a poet home hungry, could you? Church records are full of similar stories. In 1332, a knight named Raymond from Aquitaine stole silver candlesticks from his lord to pay off an armor debt, and got his ear sliced off as punishment. In 1340, a Provost knight named Arnaud secretly cut down his estate's oak forest to raise cash for a tournament prize, a golden bracelet for his lover, and peasants ratted him out. He lost his knighthood and had to kneel in church for 3 days as penance. An old friend of Jean's, Bertrand, wept in confession on his deathbed. I thought armor made me a hero, and chasing love made me legendary. But now I see armor is chains around your wallet, and love is a stone around your neck. It crushed me so bad, I couldn't even breathe. By winter of 1347, Jean finally broke. He sold his armor to a young, eager knight fresh out of training. The kid was still dreaming of glory and didn't even notice the words Jean had carved inside with a knife. This isn't honor, it's a noose. Jean packed up what little he had left, moved south with his wife and 2 kids, and started working as a dock laborer in Marseille. Later, someone saw him in a tavern, rubbing his calloused hands and laughing. Now, I don't worry about armor cutting my shoulders or what gift to send next. Turns out, life's not so bad when you're not a knight. The armor that always looks shiny in epic poems, the love that always sounds sweet in old ballads. It turns out they're both golden cages built with money. When knights parade around in their polished steel at tournaments, the ground beneath their feet isn't a red carpet of glory. It's a deep, self-dug hole of debt. It was 2 a.m., and the office building still had lights on. Lin Shen stared at his PowerPoint slides, fingers stiff from typing. The brown stain at the bottom of his coffee cup looked just like the dried blood stuck in the cracks of a medieval knight's armor. He deleted another data chart. Next week's promotion review demanded the annual department contribution rate be bumped up from 120% to 135%. Same way, a 14th century Burgundian knight had to polish every link of chainmail better than his opponent, or risk being laughed off the field before he even got unhorsed. Outside his cubicle walls came the sound of a cleaner mopping the floor. Lin Shen rubbed his temples. He remembered last month at the company team building event when Wang Jai from marketing half-jokingly said, "These days, everyone's walking around in invisible armor." He didn't respond then, but now it made sense. The armor was the mortgage payment due every month. The carefully filtered after-hours work selfies on social media. The pause in his mom's voice during video calls. "You know, Uncle Zhang's kid just got promoted to director," like how a full set of plate armor once drained 10 years of a peasant family's income. This modern version weighed just as heavy. Certifications and training programs ate up half his savings. His doctor's note for stomach bleeding from client dinners still sat crumpled in his drawer. Even weekend movie dates with his girlfriend meant bringing his laptop just in case. His phone lit up, a WeChat message from his mom. "I'll send you the match profile tomorrow. Pay attention to whether the apartment is fully paid or under loan. And make sure the car is at least a mid-size model." He opened the photo. The woman stood in front of an office tower in a tailored suit, looked almost like him right now. It reminded him of that 15th century love letter he'd seen in an archive, smelled faintly of rose perfume, but read more like a business proposal. "To prove my devotion, I offer 3 acres of vineyard from my estate, 12 milk cows, and the silver vambrace I won in last year's tournament." All those poetic lines about wasting away for love, or sleepless nights dreaming of your eyes. Underneath them all were the clacks of an abacus. Knights chased noblewomen from higher classes, just like today's dating profiles listing top-tier university grad, and homeownership hiding the real question: are you the right class? Last month, while shopping for home decor with his girlfriend, she lit up looking at a display window with a bay window. Wouldn't it be nice to have a cat here? But when the salesperson quoted the price, she quietly hooked her finger in his sleeve and whispered, "Maybe we should wait a couple more years." That moment reminded him of a line from A Knight's Diary. "I sang under Lady Mary's window for 7 nights straight. Her maid told me if I could win the St. George's Day joust, I might earn the honor of kissing her glove." He did win, but later got drunk at the victory banquet and wrote, "Truth is, I never liked fighting. What I really loved was brushing down my old warhorse in the stable." Same with Lin Shen. He secretly dreamed of quitting his job and opening a small illustration studio, but every time he tried to say it out loud, what came back were sighs and comments like, "You're already 30. Stability matters most." The cleaner's cart rolled past his desk, metal wheels clattering against the floor. It sounded exactly like that 15th century armor he saw in a museum once. The tour guide said it weighed 62 pounds, and the plates on the joints would rub skin raw. Wear it for half an hour in summer, and you'd pass out from heat stroke. But knights still fought to wear it, because the crest on the chest wasn't just decoration. It was status, power, something peasants would tip their hats to, just like today's young people killing themselves to carry luxury bags and drive flashy cars, not because they love the stuff, but because it screams, "I'm doing okay." At 3 a.m., Lin Shen finally shut his laptop. In the elevator mirror, dark circles shadowed his eyes, like bruises left by a visor strap on a knight's face. His girlfriend's message popped up. "Saw someone selling roasted sweet potatoes today. Suddenly remembered last winter, when we sat on the curb, eating one. You wouldn't admit how cold your hands were." He smiled at the screen, suddenly remembering the last page of that night's journal. Lady Mary ended up marrying a count. On her wedding day, I joined a merchant caravan heading south. The sun's warm there. Now I help train horses, and when their manes brush my hand, it feels better than any glove kiss. The elevator doors opened. Cold night air rushed in. He took a deep breath. For the first time, he realized, whether it's medieval armor or modern expectations, courtly love or modern romance, we keep wrapping glory and happiness in filters and rules. Those rigid standards aren't ours. They're someone else's script, just like a knight didn't have to die in battle wearing heavy steel. We don't have to live the lives others expect of us. Tomorrow, there'd still be PPTs to fix, a blind date to survive. But Lin Shen had made up his mind. After the presentation, he was taking his girlfriend for some roasted sweet potatoes. They'd sit on the curb again, no matter how cold it got, because compared to someone else's idea of success, living with warmth and joy, that's the only real thing worth chasing. So there I was, back in 1273. Yeah, like that long ago, on some seriously spooky autumn night at Castle Clement, near the edge of England. Picture this: dark as hell, giant fortress squatting on a hill like some brooding monster from a nightmare, and me, a 17-year-old heiress, wrapped up in like 3 wool blankets, and still shivering awake from the chill crawling up my neck. Creepy, right? I reached for my silver candlestick by the bed, and the flickering light hits the wall, which is totally dripping, not just damp. I'm talking full-on water beads running down the stone, like the walls are literally sweating. And honestly, the old servants always said the place was cursed. Legend has it, 30 years earlier, the old lord built those super thick 5-meter stone walls using some grim gray granite hauled all the way from the north, supposedly on the day they quarried the rock. Some old stonemason got his leg crushed by a rolling boulder. As he's lying there bleeding out, he screams, "These stones drank too much rain. Now they'll drink your blood." And sure enough, every rainy season since then, rusty red water seeps out of the base of the wall like dried up bloodstains. But here's the thing, it's not a curse, it's just the rocks breathing. Last year, when I was studying math with my tutor, I stumbled across the castle's building records. Turns out each granite block is like half a person tall. And even though they look smooth, if you get up close, you see these tiny little holes, finer than hair, like a dry sponge soaking up water. The stones suck in all the rain during stormy season. Then, when it gets cold in the fall, the moisture sneaks out through those little pores again. So yeah, the old stonemason wasn't wrong. The rocks really are sweating, just not with blood, with summer rainwater. But that's not even the worst part. The real problem, the castle's basically choking itself. I remember 3 years ago, tagging along with Dad while he checked out the defenses. Those arrow slits, super narrow, barely 2 hands wide. He smacked the wall and laughed. Not even a grown man could squeeze through that. But now I get it. Those so-called defenses are actually trapping all the damp inside. No airflow means no escape for the humidity. So it just swirls around between the stone and the fancy tapestries on the walls. Last month, my nurse was digging through the closet and pulled out this velvet cloak I haven't worn in years, and it was covered in greenish mold, like someone spilled plant juice on it. And don't even get me started on the castle's feet. I went with the steward to check the drainage system once, and dude, the drainage is just some shallow ditch dug into the ground next to the wall, half covered with random broken rocks. During last year's big storm, I watched rainwater just spill over the edge and soak straight into the foundation through the cracks underneath the granite, soft clay soil. So instead of draining away cleanly, the water gets stuck like in a soggy towel pressed against the wall, slowly rotting everything from the bottom up. Right now, candlelight flickers as I stare at the corner of the room, and there, on the leg of my oak chair, is a droplet the size of a soybean forming out of nowhere. This chair got it shipped from Flanders for my 10th birthday. Now, the wood is cracked all over like an old lady's face, and the fireplace, total joke. Tried burning some oak branches to dry things out, but the chimney twists 3 times, and the smoke keeps puffing back into the room, staining the walls black and making the damp even worse. Yesterday morning, I woke up, and my sheets had this weird wet spot on them, like someone snuck in during the night and left a melting ice cube right next to me. Downstairs, something clattered. It was just old John, the stable guy, grumbling again. Isabel pressed her ear to the wall and caught him yelling, "Stupid damn wall." The mortar I patched last month's already coming loose from all this damp, and I couldn't help but laugh a little. John used to swear the walls were haunted by weeping ghosts, but even he had to admit now that those ghost tears were just the rocks, basically begging for a drink. Wind sneaked in through the arrow slits, making the candle flicker like it was trying to escape. Wrapped up tight in my blankets, I stared at the winding water trails on the stone, and suddenly remembered passing by the village church 3 days ago. I saw those mud brick houses the farmers live in, walls made of clay mixed with straw, roofs covered in soft thatch. Supposedly, they keep warm in winter and dry in summer. At the time, I thought they looked short and shabby. Now, kinda jealous. At least those peasants don't wake up with their sheets soaked from some creepy stone crying session. An owl hooted outside, and I shivered. I knew when morning came, those water streaks on the wall would slowly dry up. But come nightfall, same story all over again, like that old stonemason's so-called curse. These rocks will keep sweating forever, unless someone finally gets it. The real ghost here isn't haunting us. It's the stone walls we built ourselves, born with a serious thirst for water. It was a cold winter night in 1347, and Duchess Isabel of Aquitaine stood by the fireplace in her bedroom, fingers absently rubbing the velvet trim on her sleeve. The logs snapped and popped, but instead of warmth, all she got was smoke, thick, damp, and smothering, curling into her nose like the room was slowly turning into a sauna from hell. This was already the 3rd time this month the fire had burned for hours without warming the place. Instead, the stone walls were sweating again, tiny beads of water creeping down like someone had wiped them with a wet rag. She turned toward her four-poster bed, the heavy embroidered curtains hanging low, casting jagged shadows across the floor. Pulling back the linen cover, she barely touched the mattress before yanking her hand away. The straw inside felt limp and sour, like it had been sitting in a swamp for years, and it smelled musty, like old socks that never dried. This was supposed to be fresh straw, stuffed and aired for 3 days with rosemary and lavender. How did it go bad in just a few nights? She crouched down and peeked under the edge. Sure enough, the tips of the straw were speckled with dark green mold, like someone sprinkled moss in there on purpose. And it wasn't just the mattress. Isabel grabbed the wool blanket draped at the foot of the bed and immediately grimaced. It was soaked through, heavier than it had any right to be. Just yesterday morning, it had been out in the sun. Now the edges were literally dripping. Suddenly, she remembered what the steward once said. "Wool's like a sponge, my lady, thick as it looks. It drinks the damp like crazy when the temp drops at night." And yeah, he wasn't kidding. Every morning lately, the maids had to wipe the blankets down, wringing out cloths that left puddles on the floor. A log cracked loudly in the fireplace, sending sparks bouncing off the grate. Isabel coughed as smoke swirled around her. Instead of heading up the chimney, it clung to the air, fogging up the walls with a ghostly sheen of moisture. She thought back to when the carpenter came last month to check the fireplace. He shook his head and said, "Lady, this flue twists 3 times. Wherever the wind blows, the smoke follows. That'd be one thing if we were just burning wood. But with all this damp mixing in, your walls are basically marinating in smoke soup, and wouldn't you know it?" She reached out and touched the wall nearest the fireplace. Her fingers came back wet, sticky, with soft lime mush oozing out of the cracks. She pulled the copper hairpin from her bun and let it clatter onto the dressing table. Staring at her reflection, she noticed how the damp had curled the wisps of hair around her temples into little ringlets. Mary, her maid, walked in balancing a tray of warm milk and found her standing there, lost in thought. "Milady," she whispered gently, "maybe we should flip the mattress and air it out." Isabel gave a bitter laugh. "I've had it flipped 3 times already. Every time it dries out fine during the day, and by morning it's soaked through again, like sleeping on a sponge someone left under a leaky roof." She remembered last winter when her youngest child spiked a fever and the doctor blamed it on bad bed vapors. Who knew those vapors were really just years of rotting damp trapped in the straw? She kicked off her embroidered slippers and stepped barefoot onto the stone floor. Cold shot up her spine like icy fingers crawling up her legs. And this was only October. What would it be like when real winter hit and rain and snow started seeping down the bedposts, crawling under the covers? She felt the chill of the linen sheets against her skin. The straw beneath her crackled softly, not the crisp sound of dry hay, but more like someone crunching a wet rag under their heel. She stared up at the canopy above her bed, where patches of mold had bloomed like frost. glowing faintly blue in the moonlight. A cough echoed from the next room. The steward again. Suddenly, she remembered something the kitchen boy once muttered. Farmers use wheat straw that's baked dry, and they lay pine needles underneath. Keeps him warm all night. Nothing like these fancy mattresses we've got, which feel more like sacks full of water. She rolled over, and the straw groaned under her weight, like an old woman sighing into the dark. Outside, the wind howled, and together, the two sounds blended into something that almost sounded like quiet sobbing. That night, Isabel had one weird-ass dream. She was lying in the middle of a swamp. Her straw mattress had turned into floating reeds, and that wool blanket, heavy as a soaked sponge, pressing down on her like she was drowning in laundry. The fire in her hearth was dead, and instead of smoke, it was raining inside her room. Droplets pattering down her collar like the ceiling had turned into a leaky shower head. She tried to sit up, but her arms and legs were stuck in some thick, damp air, like she was swimming through fog that just wouldn't let go. When morning bells rang, Isabel opened her eyes and saw a faint, wet mark on her pillow. Was that sweat from her nightmare, or more damp creeping up from the mattress? She sat up just as Mary was hauling the bedroll out of the room. Droplets clung to the ends of the straw, catching the early light like someone had tossed a handful of half-dried silver beans. It was another long, drizzly autumn in central England. 1347. Rain just wouldn't quit. In the great hall of Warwick Castle, Lady Alina trembled under her embroidered canopy. The oak at the foot of her bed was already growing green fur, and that wool blanket felt like a soggy weight on her chest. Outside, rain tapped against the windows, mixed with the slow drip-drip of water seeping through the stone walls. Way too familiar. Like the coughing fit the steward had last winter when he spat blood. And 3 miles away, in Willow's Hollow, old John the farmer was tossing one last bundle of dry thorns into his fireplace. Under the thatched roof, warm yellow light glowed off the clay walls, and his little girl, wrapped in a mattress stuffed with sun-dried wheat straw, was already snoring like a contented kitten. This wasn't a fluke. While nobles tossed and turned in their damp stone castles, the peasants below had long figured out how to survive the wet. Take those humble-looking mud brick walls. John would mix chopped straw and horse dung into the clay before shaping them into bricks. Sounds gross. Yeah, well, once they dried rock hard under the sun and got stacked into half-foot thick walls, they basically came alive. When it rained, water didn't just pour in like through stone cracks. It got sucked slowly into tiny pores in the clay. Then, when the sun came back out, the wall breathed again, pushing the moisture right back out like it was sweating. Totally natural. Meanwhile, castle walls were solid as hell. Once rain got in, it never came out, turning those proud stone towers into secret water balloons, hiding behind fancy facades. Mud brick, it ate the water, then spit it out, always just right dampness, like a warm blanket fresh out of the sun. And the roofs, stone-tiled roofs, looked all fancy and noble. Sure, until the mortar between the slabs cracked from cold and heat, letting rain pour straight into the walls and soften up the stone like soggy bread. But John's thatch roof, that was like wearing a waterproof hat that shook off rain like magic. He used tall, unheaded wheat stalks, golden dry, and layered just right. The bottom layer tilted upward, the next layer overlapping 2/3 of the one below, and so on, built up thick as a grown man's waist. Rain could pour all it wanted. It just slid right off the curve of the straw, like the roof was waxed. Even cooler, all those tiny spaces between the straw acted like natural air vents during the day. Sun-warmed air flowed through, carrying out any trapped dampness, and in winter, those same gaps became insulation, keeping the place cozier than any drafty stone wall ever could. Once, Lady Aliner's maid pretended to be sick, just to hide out in a peasant's hut during a storm. Rubbing that soft thatch roof, she kept muttering, "How the heck is this raggedy shack less damp than the castle?" That part nobles could never wrap their heads around. The floor, castle stone floors, were basically puddle parks. Even rats gave them side-eye. But John's dirt floor, always covered in fresh straw, every fall after harvest, he'd spread it thick, so deep it almost swallowed your boots. Didn't matter if it got trampled all day. Before bed, he'd rake it flat, toss on some dry lime, and boom, done. That straw soaked up damp like a champ. Way better than wool blankets. Rainy days, all that rising moisture got sucked right into the stalks. When the sun finally showed up, he just tossed the mats outside to air out, and the damp vanished with the warmth. If the rain just wouldn't quit, he'd throw in some pine needles with the straw smelled amazing, kept bugs away, and cut through any moldy funk. One winter, the castle bakery was so soggy, even the flour sprouted green fuzz. But John buried his grain barrel right in that straw-covered dirt floor. And come spring, every wheat kernel was still hard as rocks. Funny thing is, nobles called peasant homes hay nests. But when it came to sleeping comfortably, peasants won hands down. Lady Aliner's stone bed frame creaked all night from the damp, swelling the stones, while John's wooden one stayed solid. Since mud walls didn't shove moisture into the wood, her wool blanket had to roast by the fire for 3 days before it was safe to use again. Or else it stank like old socks left in a damp cellar. Meanwhile, peasant women washed their coarse linen sheets in wood ash until they turned white, hung them on straw ropes to dry, and brought them in smelling like sunshine and fresh-cut grass. And here's the kicker. Peasant houses were small, so the heat from the fireplace actually filled the whole place. No ice-cold drafts, snatching warmth midair, like in those drafty-ass castle halls, where half the wall warmed up just before the wind stole the heat back into the rocks. That winter hit especially hard. Lady Aliner came down with such bad joint pain. She couldn't even grip a silver spoon. Her doctor pored over Hippocrates' scrolls and blamed it on wet cold seeping into the blood. But John's wife, stitching a warm coat for her daughter, muttered, "Our mud walls are good, damp maybe, None of that bone-deep chill. Later, the lady sent her steward to check out the peasant huts. He came back shaking his head, muttering, "Looks cheap, sure. But those folks have used the same walls for over 100 years, still standing, not falling apart, more than we can say for our fancy stone castles." Turns out comfort ain't about stacking gold coins. Farmers might not have read no architecture books, but they learned from the land, watching how mud dried in spring, where rain ran in summer, how straw held moisture in fall, and how thatch blocked snow in winter. Those crappy old tricks nobles looked down on. They were bought with generations of sore joints, ruined harvests, and freezing nights, while castle walls dripped and lords shivered under 10 layers of wool. Peasant homes hummed quietly, straw soaking up damp, wheat straw roofs bouncing raindrops off like shields, and little girls dreaming sweet dreams of sun-warmed haystacks, rhythmic drips from the eaves, and the cozy smell of firewood crackling in the hearth. And then there was dawn, the worst time in the castle. Lord Roger rolled over on his velvet-draped bed, and bam, his left knee flared like someone jabbed him with a red-hot poker. He gasped, clutching at it through his linen sleep pants, feeling a hard knot under the skin, like a frozen pebble hiding in his bones. This was the 7th time this month he'd woken up screaming in pain. Last time, it was his right shoulder. Before that, his finger joints. It rotated like clockwork, like some invisible hammer was slowly nailing his skeleton together. Outside, the rain still hadn't quit. Water droplets from the stone walls plopped steadily into a copper basin, each ping echoing loud in the silent bedroom, like some annoying little drummer playing through the night. Roger remembered how, 30 years ago, when he first inherited this castle, he used to chase wild boar through storms in full chainmail. Rain would stream off his shoulders like the sky was hosing him down, and he'd laugh like it was some kind of blessing. Now, just a little autumn damp had his old bones creaking like a rusty gate. His personal servant, John, slipped in quietly to stoke the fire. As sparks popped in the fireplace, Roger caught a glimpse of the wall behind, covered in gray-green mold, twisting in weird shapes, like a bunch of wobbly ghosts dancing in the dark. That tapestry was brand new last spring, too. Now it smelled like rotting leaves, and even the toughest falcon refused to perch on the oak beams in the great hall. Said they were so damp you could wring them out like a sponge. Breakfast came with a silver tray and a side of crunch. The bread was so hard it clinked like rocks. The steward mumbled something about the oven bricks leaking rainwater, messing up the dough. Roger took a bite anyway. Mold mixed with graininess filled his mouth, and suddenly he was thinking about peasant black bread again. Those little mud brick huts with thatch roofs that kept dry as a drum, while their kitchens burned all day long. Back then, he thought those houses were like sweaty ovens. Now, he kinda envied them. At least peasants didn't have to eat breakfast while watching their wives' embroidered skirt drip water from last night's leak. At noon, the sun finally peeked through the clouds. Wrapped in 3 wool cloaks, Roger shuffled into the courtyard for some fresh air. The stone path gleamed with puddles, and the railing he leaned on felt so cold it numbed his palms. The hunting master showed up with bad news. The new hounds were always listless, and the vet said their paws were rotting between the toes. Roger scratched his own ankle, which had been itching like hell. Lifting his pants, he saw a dark red rash creeping up. Looked like someone crushed a bunch of poison berries and rubbed them in. And at night, oh man, that was the worst, staring at the water droplets forming on his bed canopy, listening to rain gurgling down the chimney like the house was slowly drowning. Roger started remembering old stories from his nursemaid. Tales about executed craftsmen buried under the castle, their angry spirits turning into damp that haunted every room. Used to laugh at that stuff, but now he just stared at the stain on the wall. Those lines looked way too much like fingers. Stretching slowly toward his bed, Dr. Lionel came by to check his pulse and shook his head, said Roger's blood was full of wet cold poison and needed bleeding. Last time that happened, he couldn't stand for 3 days and saw stars every time he moved. Then Lionel suggested burning mugwort to fumigate the place. Ended up choking the whole castle in smoke for hours. Even the mare in the stables sneezed non-stop for 3 days. Worst of all was sleep. Now, Roger dreaded closing his eyes. He kept dreaming he was sinking into a deep pond, surrounded by floating moldy blankets, rust-covered candlesticks, and his younger self's face staring up from the bottom with lips smeared in black-green fuzz. The castle scribe wrote in his diary, "Lord has changed lately. Gone is the laughter from the hunt. Now he snaps if a pawn is off by half an inch. Lady says she hears him groaning at night, like something's crushing his chest." The servants whispered among themselves. "Must be cursed," they said. Even the monks came with holy water, and it did nothing. What they didn't know, that bottle barely emptied before the damp sucked it right into the stones, left no trace, not even a wet spot. When Roger finally saw the old oak tree in the courtyard collapse one afternoon after the rain cleared up, its roots rotted from sitting in standing water for weeks. Something clicked. It wasn't a cursed craftsman's ghost, and it sure as hell wasn't the devil messing around. It was the stone and the rain, the leaky roof and the sealed-up walls, the damp creeping into his mattress every night, soaking into his bones, chilling his blood, and slowly drowning the light inside him. He stared at the fallen tree, white fungal threads crawling under its bark, and suddenly remembered those peasant mud brick huts, walls made of clay and straw that breathed, sucking in moisture when it rained and letting it out when the sun came out. But his castle, these cold, unfeeling stones, never breathed. They just held onto every drop like a sponge, slowly squeezing the damp into everything he touched. His bed, his skin, his soul. When autumn winds picked up again, Roger sat by the fireplace, wrapped in thick blankets, listening to the slow drip-drip from inside the walls. This time, he didn't frown. He just sighed quietly, because now he knew the scariest enemy wasn't on the battlefield with a sword. It was the bed you slept in, the wall you leaned against, and the invisible, silent wetness seeping into your life year after year. And tonight, as you crawl into your warm, dry sheets, you probably won't think about how that cozy feeling holds 1,000 years of damp history when you roll over and your mattress doesn't sweat, or when you open a window at night without seeing condensation on the walls. You take it for granted, but those simple comforts, they were carved out over centuries, from cracks in stone, from haystacks, from smoky fireplaces, all part of humanity's slow grind for survival. Those medieval castle walls soaked in humidity, they were basically the first material labs. Stonecutters never imagined that the cold slabs they chiseled would become natural condensation traps, each block secretly sweating when warm, moist air slammed into its 20-degree chill. That ancient misery sparked today's building material revolution. The glossy tile in your bathroom, its dense glaze, is a direct punch at stone's damp-absorbing flaw. The porous bricks on modern building exteriors, their honeycomb structure, total copycat of peasant mud bricks, just smarter, more precise. And don't even get started on vapor barriers hidden behind drywall, thin as a moth's wing, but tough enough to lock moisture out completely. That tech, born from scientists staring at peeling medieval plaster, calculating humidity curves until they cracked the code. The evolution of ventilation, total spy war with the air. Those narrow arrow slits in castles, meant for defense, sure, but they trapped damp like a prison. Just a few openings meant it took 3 days for indoor and outdoor air to swap, long enough for mold to throw a party in the corners. Now, your kitchen range hood spins once and swaps the whole room's air. Your bathroom fan runs 24/7, sniffing for humidity and kicking in with a Chinese letter, before things even get weird. Behind these simple machines, centuries of fluid mechanics research, from 19th century duct experiments to 20th century thermal pressure theory, all the way to today's smart ventilation systems. So next time you complain about a draft in your AC room, remember, nobles stuck in smoky castle halls couldn't even get a breeze to blow straight through. But the funniest twist, modern damp proofing, went full circle back to peasant wisdom, that ground level straw layer farmers used for centuries. Now it's high-end basement vapor barriers, the layered thatch roofs. They inspired today's breathable, waterproof roofing systems. Outer layer blocks rain, middle layer breathes, inner layer insulates. Same idea as the old straw plus, reeds plus wood stack, just swapped out natural fibers for polymers. And get this, underfloor heating, that genius trick letting us walk barefoot in winter. It's just the medieval hearth evolved. Back then, fires warmed half a wall. Now, hot water pipes under the floor wrap the whole place in warmth. Old smoke stained stone walls with acid. Today's radiant heat loops don't leak a speck of dust. You might think all this is just the natural march of tech, but take one look at medieval beds in a museum and you'll get it. Those moldy straw mattresses, those those wool blankets crusted with salt stains. They're not just old junk, they're records of struggle. Every single one tells the story of humans fighting damp the hard way. Modern comfort didn't fall from the sky. It was built on the grind of the first 1,000 chisels that broke in a stonemason's hands. The 10,000 haystacks farmers turned under the sun. The million humidity meters scientists busted in labs. When your walls stay dry through the rainy season, when you can crack a window in winter without fogging up the glass. Yeah, you call that normal, but behind that normal is one of humanity's greatest superpowers. Taking every time nature kicked our ass and turning it into a step closer to understanding the world. So next time you're snuggled in your dry sheets, scrolling on your phone, spare a thought for those nobles shivering under wet wool in their damp stone castles. They had no idea that every miserable night they spent soaked and cold was paving the way for your warm, dry sleep today. Humanity's chase for comfort was never about beating nature. It was about learning to live smarter with the old rivals. Damp, cold, heat, and every bit of ease we enjoy now. It's the coziest trophy from a 1,000-year war with wet, the warmest victory you never knew you were winning.